My name is David Nalle. I'm the former chairman of the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I have been a member of the Libertarian Party since 1975, even though I'm currently sometimes registered as a Republican. Under Texas law, I can be a member of the Libertarian Party and actually be a Republican at the same time. They haven't fixed that omission yet. I may have prompted them to fix that, but they haven't done it yet. Anyway, I have a history of having been in the Libertarian Party and worked on Libertarian campaigns, worked for Ride, and then a couple other campaigns, Ed Clark, and then switching over to the Republican Party, and then switching back again a couple of times. Because the party boundaries are fluid, and a lot of which party you're in depends on what strategy you want to pursue. It's very true that the Republican Party has a lot more people elected to office than the Libertarian Party does. But at the same time, there are a lot of problems with the Republican Party, and they're getting worse and worse. In the era of Trump, we already had the era of the religious right. Now we have Trump added on top of that. The Republican Party is very far from the Republican Party that I joined in the 1970s. It's now become a much more populist, much more socially conservative party, and those of us who were sort of the old-style Republicans who believe in small government and limited intrusion on people's lives don't really have a place in the Republican Party. I just read an article last week which was talking about how that Republican Party almost doesn't exist anymore. Now this is written by a Democrat who didn't really understand what's going on in the Republican Party, but he was right in his criticism that the Republican Party doesn't have a defined place for socially liberal, fiscally conservative Republicans any longer. And that's the Republican Party that I came out of, and that's my background. And I think that's probably true for everyone here who, well, certainly those that are old enough to have been alive in the 80s or the 70s. But in New Hampshire also.
Not so much the New Hampshire guys.
But
I was born in the 80s.
New Hampshire has a lot of factionalism, and there has been a socially liberal faction in the Republican Party all along. For a while, the Republican Liberty Caucus was very strong in New Hampshire on that basis. But things are changing in politics. A realignment is taking place. And I think there's going to be something which happens sometime, I hope, in the future. You said 20 years. I hope it'll be sooner than that.
Yeah.
But, you know, what happened in...
That's when we can start fighting in 20 years.
My background is a historian,
Yeah.
and doing history of the 18th and 19th century especially. And back in the 1850s, when the Republican Party was founded, it was a third party. And the thing that made it succeed was when large numbers of members of other parties decided they would switch to the Republican Party en masse. And the key moment was when Thurlow Weed, the leader of the Democrats in Ohio, basically switched parties and brought the entire state party with it. And that began to take place in more and more places. And when that happened, there was a key transition from the Republican Party being a third party, just like its predecessor, the Free Soil Party, to being a major national party, and the Whig Party literally just collapsed, and all the Whigs became Republicans except for a few who went over to be Democrats. When that happens, and I think it may happen in our immediate future, the Libertarian Party has the opportunity to be there to catch all those Republicans and independents who are former Republicans, because a lot of Republicans have left the party and gone independent. The Libertarian Party can position itself to receive those people, and it's already happened for some people. Laura being the best example, Bill Weld, and this is something that I think is really important to discuss. And I want to give each of that's it for me, but I'm going to hopefully organize this a little bit. I want to give each of our panelists a chance to speak. I'm not going to say anything about their background, let them introduce themselves. So why don't we start all the way at that end, and we'll go forward from there.
All right, thank you. So I am Brandon Phinney. I am the rep for Rochester Wards 4 and 5. My background in politics...
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Sorry. I thought that was a given here. So I first got interested in politics in 2008 with the Ron Paul campaign. He opened up my eyes and ears to a lot of issues that I never thought that I would agree with. So that kind of started down my path into kind of where I am today. I voted for Gary Johnson in 2012, and in 2016 The reason I got into politics was because I was overseas in 2015 with my unit, and I was seeing some things happening back home I really didn't agree with. They suspended the House rules to spend $2 million to implement Operation Granite Hammer, which was effectively a powerful drug war enforcement program in New Hampshire, and I was very angry about it. So I said that instead of complaining about the issues that I was seeing, I wanted to run for office, and so independents don't really have any way of getting on a ballot and being being an effective candidate in New Hampshire. So I had to pick a party that I had the most agreement with at that time. We didn't have ballot access either, so I ran and got elected as Republican. I switched parties after I didn't like what they were doing with the platform and the direction of the state economically and socially. So after the state passed our $12 billion budget, that was the end of the road for me. So I switched parties after all the sessions were over in 2017.
Well, my name is Dyer. I represent Borough 37, which is the towns of Hudson and Pelham, New Hampshire. My political background is a little interesting. I ran for state rep, not even to win. I put my name on the ballot because I was very discontent with the current representation. Specifically, I lived in the Speaker's district. And I thought that the way that he was administering the House was not only unfair, but also at times, in the case of certainly that rule suspension, with regards to Granite Hammer, yeah, quite outright tyranny. Spending money with, granted he did have the votes, but anyway, right, setting that aside. I ran because I saw the administration of the House being very poor. I saw policy not going the way of the libertarian ethic that some legislators had followed previously or had been trying to implement. So I put my name on the ballot. It cost $2 in New Hampshire, and so I decided to actually run a real campaign. I decided to actually go out and knock doors and just try to be informational about it. On all of my literature, I didn't mention that I was a conservative because that would have been a lie. I didn't mention that I was a Republican, although it was technically true. I went to all of the Republican committee meetings in my town, and some of them for the county. So I just got involved. I just went and started going. Even though I was a libertarian, I made no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I openly supported McAfee all throughout the primary process, which ruffled a lot of feathers. So I've basically always been a libertarian. For a long time I didn't know what to call it. But I grew up in a household with a father who really didn't like government and was pretty crazy about not liking government. So I guess that's where I kind of got my philosophical leanings. But my political involvement was more so just to kind of wake people up. To kind of say, hey, these are the people representing you right here in New Hampshire. Are they actually representing you? It's a really good question to ask yourself from time to time. Are they actually representing your interests in Congress? And to my surprise, I found that a great many people in Pelham felt the answer was no. And so I capitalized on that, and I came in 11 out of 11 in the Republican primary by a mere margin of 10 votes, 20 on the recount. And the rest is history because the district is gerrymandered. Of course, all 11 Republicans were elected, including myself. And then the fun started. So on organization day, when the Republicans came together to caucus to select their nominee for Speaker, naturally, Speaker Jasper, who's in my district, was not too popular among Republicans, and it was a very close vote between him and the nearest vote getter to replace him. I ended up being the lone dissenting vote in that particular election for Speaker, the organization day for the Republicans. And again, I dissented and was the lone dissenting vote for the actual Speaker's race when we were inaugurated on the 7th and actually elected the Speaker. My reasoning for doing so was because essentially the candidates who were postulating themselves for Speaker were, again, the whole reason why I ran was because the administration of the House was terribly destructive to not only human liberty, but also, just actually good governance in general. If you're going to have governance, it certainly cannot be by the way that Speaker Jasper had been administering it in the House. So, 6 days later, after the Organization Day vote, I paid dues to LPNH, and I called up Darrell W. Perry, who I knew already, and I said, Darrell, not to freak you out, but I just paid dues to LPNH, and he said, it's all right, I saw. He said, you gonna switch? And at the time, I didn't know if I was gonna switch. I just knew that I was not a Republican, and I knew that every step of the way that I was going to be worked against by the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire, because they knew who I was, they knew what I was about. And come the start of session on January 3rd, we started into it, and we started having committee hearings that week, or actually the following week, but it became very apparent that the House leadership, the Deputy Majority Leader and Majority Leader, were very much interested, very proactively interested, in ensuring that all of the legislation that either myself or several other people who I co-sponsored legislation with, making sure that that stopped in committee dead in its tracks, and was put on the consent calendar to be killed. And it was very obvious. In fact, at one point, the Deputy Majority Leader actually told me to my face, we're going to make sure your bills die. And I took a great deal of offense to that, because as someone, granted, being elected as a Republican, I didn't expect to be fought by other Republicans. Granted, I know I'm not a Republican in their vein, but I certainly didn't expect to be met with that kind of open hostility. Not but a month later, February 9th, I came out and I re-registered in very late January as a Libertarian, once the town clerk actually was able to allow me to do so. And the rest is history. But that's my story of coming to the LP and my slight political pedigree. I know I'm a newbie. It was an interesting road to get to the LP.
Okay, well, my name's Ebke, and a lot of you probably know some of my story. But just tell you a little bit about my history. I was a Republican for the first 54 years of my life. I was born in 1962. My dad was a Goldwater Republican. My grandparents were Taft Republicans. And the family history, family lore, family myth, maybe, says that my first word was Goldwater. And so, I don't really believe that, but maybe. I could never imagine myself having been anything other than a Republican. And until, I think the seeds of it started back in 2008 with the Paul campaign. And I don't agree with Ron Paul on everything. I agree with him on a lot. But he was the first guy that I saw that was actually talking about expanding liberty and limiting government. Republicans have been saying that for years and weren't doing anything about it. In fact, government just kept getting bigger, certainly through the Bush years. And I think George W. Bush is a truly decent man. I just disagree with what some of the things were that he did. So come 2014, I ran for the legislature, won obviously. As I noted this noon, we're a nonpartisan, officially nonpartisan legislature, and I won. 2016 was sort of the tipping point for me, because I probably would still be a Republican if a Rand Paul had gotten elected. I probably, I probably wouldn't have moved, but certainly the combination of the current Republican, the way the direction the Republican Party went, and the circumstances within our own state. 3 votes, death penalty, DACA 1 and DACA 2. Nebraska hadn't introduced any DACA legislation. 3 votes, votes and overrides. May 5th of 2016, I'm sitting at the Republican State Convention, and the governor gets up and he calls out by name every single Republican who voted against him on those. He says, it's time for us to start electing more platform Republicans. I walked out and I switched my registration online that afternoon, and I announced it a couple of weeks later. So, and you know, and the governor's been pretty mad at me ever since. But you know, I am the Judiciary Committee chair, and I don't know how often you ever met with the Judiciary Committee or big chairs, you know, but you know, in a state where we have significant state patrol issues, where we have significant corrections issues, I've been chair of the Judiciary Committee since January of 2017. I haven't spoken to the governor, so that's where we're at. So anyhow, that's my down and dirty story.
So my name is Bill Weld. I've really been a libertarian since I was a student in college and graduate school. I was obsessed with John Stuart Mill on liberty and the idea of self-regarding conduct. In law school, I became taken over by Friedrich Hayek on
Road to Serfdom.
no, not the Road to Serfdom, the other one. Anyway, Hayek was my hero when I was in law school. And I was elected governor in kind of a fluke election in 1990 in Massachusetts when the Democratic Party split right down the middle. In my very first press conference, I said to the press, welcome fellow libertarians. And they all, of course, burst out laughing. And I don't know why I said it. It just kind of occurred to me, but it became increasingly obvious as time went on that I was very much in line with those principles. In this very town in 1992, I was speaking at the Republican National Convention and said, simple little sentence, I want the government out of your pocketbook and out of your bedroom. So I guess that's the definition of fiscally conservative and socially liberal. It was too much for the Buchanan people who were sitting there in the front row, holding their red signs, and they all jumped up and threw their signs over their heads and said, that's it, he just admitted it, he's gay, he's gay. So there wasn't a lot of flexibility in the party hierarchy there, and I suffered under the lash of the Republican National Party's social conservatism my entire time, both terms as governor. And Newt and Haley, Gingrich and Haley Barbour would send me to talk to the major donors to the Republican Party. And I'd say, why me? You know, I'm the super liberal. They say, because these people in those Republican National Committee donors, they're all pro-choice. And we have to talk to them for 45 minutes about why they should support the party and the RNC, you know, irregardless. Whereas, you know, you don't have to spend those 45 minutes dribbling around the court with them. You can go right for the hoop. So that was why the party never really lowered the boom on me, because I was helpful on the financial front. But I did say at the Orlando convention when I officially made the switch, they said, how do you feel? And I said, free at last. And
It's liberating.
it is liberating, and the more time goes by, the more liberated I feel. And I've gone around a bunch of these conventions with an eye to expressing what the party has to do to win in 2020. Not who should do it, but what work needs to be done. And I said last night, and I'll say it again here, I do think it's not fanciful to suppose that the Libertarians could elect a president of the United States in 2020.
Here.
Yeah. One reason I say that is not only there's a doctrinal path up the middle, as Gary Johnson used to say all the last cycle, you know, the Republican Party is not socially inclusive or tolerant or welcoming or anything like that, and the Democratic Party is certainly not fiscally responsible. But so there's a path up the middle ideologically, but in addition to that, both those parties, as Dave says, of the Republican Party, are splitting apart. You know, when the Whig Party split in half in the 1850s, one half, the self-styled Know-Nothing Party, They called themselves the Know Nothing Party because if you were asked, have you been to any meetings, what was discussed, you were supposed to say, I know nothing. And it was a party founded on, I'm going to ask you if this sounds familiar, founded on nativism. They hated all these Catholics coming in from Ireland and Italy and elsewhere in Western Europe. So it was founded on anti-immigrant fervor, violent rallies, and conspiracy theories. Sound familiar at all? That's the Donald J. Trump wing of the Republican Party. And they went one way and spun out into outer space and thankfully disappeared. The other part of the Whig Party joined the Free Soilers, where I think John C. Fremont was the candidate in '56, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't really get there until after.
He was about as radical as you could get.
Yeah, no, he was a cool guy. So then they elected Abraham Lincoln president of the United States in 1860 with a lot of help, as Dave was saying. But the Democrats, Bernie Sanders last time had a really good run, might have even beaten Trump, but he doesn't speak for the regulars in the Democratic Party at all. And I recently met with a woman named Nancy Jacobson who founded an organization called No Labels, trying to promote the idea there should be no labels in DC. Great idea, those entrenched parties are not going to buy it, but she has 48 members in a problem solvers caucus who agree to vote together if 75% of them can agree on what an issue should be, and then the idea is to create a swing vote there. And they recently defended a guy named Dan, I think it was Lipinski, in Chicago against an attack from the left in the Democratic primary. And he was a big foot in the Democratic Party, but the left wing of the Democratic Party doesn't take any prisoners and does not have a sense of humor. And he, on account of a long family background, being a devout Catholic, was pro-life on the abortion issue. So they came after him, hammer and tongs, and he barely eked out a win. And the next day, the woman who'd run against him, who's very much pro-choice, like me too, but I have a sense of humor. And she said, we're not going to rest until we've drummed out of the Democratic Party everybody like this terrible guy like Phinney. So there's fault lines and fissures in the Democratic Party too. Certainly, I agree with Dave, the Republican Party is cruising for a split up here, and Trump is going to be help to engineer that. So, just as happened with the Republican Party when Thurlow Weed made that decision and all the Ohio people went on, we could be in a position to be appealing to a wide swath. 60% of the people in the country identify themselves as fiscally conservative and socially liberal. They're imprisoned by the parties who have long since stopped doing any realistic work for policy development in Washington. They're locked in a death spiral embrace to just perpetuate themselves both in office, and it's an ugly sight, and I think increasingly people see that it's ugly. So both in terms of ideology and in terms of the practical politics of those two parties getting involved in civil wars, it could be a very fortuitous time for the Libertarians. And I must say, I don't see anything in our party platform that should be offensive or objectionable to anybody. We have a natural appeal to millennials who are about to inherit the kingdom. They're going to be the biggest voting bloc very soon.
I'm a millennial legislator,
so I think there's a whole lot of factors conspiring to give us an excellent chance in 2020, and I would subscribe to everything the senator said at lunch about working with other people and not being objectionable. You can disagree without being disagreeable, but the big trend lines all favor us for 2020, I guess. So that's the ultimate transition that is devoutly to be wished.
I'll start out asking questions. I'm going to take a question from the audience too, but I have an idea to put something forward. One of the problems, every party has problems. We've talked about Republican Party problems, Democratic Party problems. The Libertarian Party has some problems too. And I see one of the biggest ones being ideological absolutism. And I would put out, because if the Libertarian Party is stuck in this absolutist mindset, it's very hard for them to accept people from outside the party coming into the party. It's become somewhat insular and inbred over the years. And the question I have really for the legislators, for the governor, is how do you make sure the Libertarian Party is open to getting new people into the party and basically making the tent bigger, opening the doors of the big tent to make it into a party which is more accepting without losing the ideological basis of the party. So if anybody would like to.
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, if you couldn't tell, I'm radical as all hell. But in government, that will not sell. It certainly isn't going to sell for a long time, if it ever does. When I go in, well, actually when we go into the House chambers, we have to be very cognizant of that. If we're going to pitch a message, it needs to be reasonable. And one thing that I've said a number of times when we've been in private, or when Joseph, you and I have all been talking, it needs to be radical but reasonable. And I think that is the absolute key. If you can find a way to take that principle and translate it, like actually Senator Ebke said earlier, translate it into a very simple message, really distill it down, that is what will win. That is what will sell. Because ultimately, taxation is theft, as simple as that might be, is a concept that many voters just will not resonate with. They're going to say, well, but we've always been taxing people. We need to show them, here's why we need to tax people less, and here's how we can do it. Here's why we need to spend less. Here's how we can do it. We need to give people a path to where we want to go. And like she was saying, it is all about the direction in which you're moving. It is all about the direction in which you're moving. If you provide that path and you make sure that at the end of that path in your mind is that principle, every day you're taking a step, you're making a gain. And I might have my own sensibilities. I might not believe in the state, but I recognize that the majority of people in this society do believe in the existence of a state and see that it's going to stay around for the foreseeable future. So,
Rock, paper, scissors. I would say that we need to adopt a policy of radical realism. Okay, and I think it's really important. And I've been to a number of the state conventions, and I would say that it's really important to have people out there who have the radical ideas, who are the ones whispering in our ears. But I think it's also important that we have people who maybe aren't the radicals, who are maybe I consider myself sort of a classical liberal, and I think it's important to have kind of this diversity of kind of libertarian views and talking to each other and pointing to that the city on a hill, if you will, recognizing that it's going to be a long march to get there, and let's not cannibalize each other in the process.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a bit more pragmatic in my approach. I may not be a radical anarchist, but I do like to explain a lot about what our philosophy is to even other people in the House by saying, look, I have a very simple way of analyzing how I vote on something and the kinds of bills that I've put in by saying, what is the role of government? I do a live stream after every House session to talk about the bills of that day, how the vote went, how I voted, and what I feel about it. And I tried to make known that you have to ask, what is the role of government on this issue? If they don't need to be inserted here, then I'm going to vote no. If it's going to spend money that we don't have or that we shouldn't spend in the first place, I'm going to vote no. And I've taken that approach to how I talk to my seatmates in the House, and I say, I turn to the guy to my right, as Representative Rand, and I say, how do you feel about gun rights today? Or are you gonna vote against, government growth today, or vote in favor of government growth today? I always try to, put things in his mind to say how you vote is going to reflect on the public. It's going to impact them directly. And sometimes I've been able to influence his vote, to get him to agree with what I'm trying to say. I try to make sure I say things audibly enough so that the people sitting around me can hear me. And I think I've had a positive impact by doing that, because people are really happy to see me when I get there. They ask about the videos now. Like, it's cool that we're such a small caucus in this house of 400 people, and people care about how we vote. They watch every vote. They come up to us and they ask us questions why we voted for this thing. All three of us. There's 3 of us, and they come and they ask us why and how. And I feel like we're influencing something in this house. In New Hampshire, I feel like that we're at the forefront of getting us to the cusp of people accepting our philosophy publicly. I think what's going to hurt us, campaigning, is that they're not going to see the R, they're not going to see that D, and so they're going to be confused. They're going to immediately reject it in their mind because they don't understand it. So our job is to go to the voters and say, here's where I stand. Here's how I voted on things, and here's why. I feel like if we can get past the party stuff and focus on what we've done in our jobs, how we've made their lives more free, how we've saved them money, that's how they're going to keep us in office, and that's what I plan to use in the future.
So I'm proudly wearing a taxation is theft. It was actually my line in 2016, introduced by pointing out that Proudhon, who was a French anarchist, said that property is theft. He maintained that property is theft because, of course, no one should own anything and everything should be held in common. And I said I disagree with Proudhon. I think that coercive taxation is theft, and that was how I introduced the topic. And how do you cut down on taxation? You cut down on spending. And I know how you cut down on spending. If you're making a budget for year 2, you take the budget from the previous year and you throw it in the wastebasket. And you assume that the appropriation for every account in the budget is 0. It's called zero-based budgeting. And if that account can't justify itself, it gets 0. Not to be confused with the practice in Washington, D.C., where anything less than a 5 or 10% increase in each account in the budget is considered a cut. So when I got to office, I had no prior experience in elective office. I knew nothing about state government, which turned out to be a huge advantage because it wasn't just that I didn't know the sacred cows were sacred. I didn't even know they were cows. So we abolished a lot of stuff. And I had 8,000 fewer state workers after my first day in office than I did the day I came in. And I never got a postcard in 2 terms about where is that essential government employee that you cashiered, furlough rather, on the first day in office. So in 1992, my second year, I was voted the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States by both the Wall Street Journal and the Cato Institute because we cut spending in absolute dollars from year 1 to year 2. Actually spent less, not just level funding, which is highly unusual. So it can be done. It's very easy to do. You just have to have the will to do it. And there's so many agencies begging to be abolished. The United States Department of Education is a malevolent force in our society. It was a wet kiss from Jimmy Carter to the teachers' unions in 1976, and why it hasn't been abolished before now, I have absolutely no idea. But there is so much low-hanging fruit that I think we can drive this taxation as theft, because it's so unnecessary to have taxation at the levels that it now is, because the spending is at levels that are completely unnecessary. So I think we're going to ride this pony home.
Let's see if there are any questions from the audience.
Oh, wow.
We've got a bunch of people in the audience. Let's start over there on the left.
Okay, so, you've switched from Republican to Libertarian. We've had some Democrats switch as well. But we've also seen the reverse. We've seen Ron Paul, you mentioned, Laura. He was a Libertarian candidate at one time and switched to being a Republican and spent decades in office, taking advantage of Republican Party infrastructure to keep him getting reelected. We've seen people like Justin Amash is as libertarian as anyone in this room, right? But he takes advantage of the Republican Party infrastructure to keep getting reelected. So I don't resent that. How does switching, this is going to impact on some level reelectability. How do you handle that? What can the Libertarian Party do to support candidates like you to get reelected? Like, how do we build that infrastructure? How do we make ourselves viable as a party to get elected?
Let me add something to that. Let's just quickly do a quick story. Have any of you been re-elected as a libertarian?
Yes,
The year to do
So
so.
the question
This is it.
is, this goes along with what the prospects for that are.
I can start. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I get asked that almost every day. So him and I, because we're so opposites as far as what we're going to look like on a ballot. He's in a little, he's got 11 people in his area. I'm in a single candidate, seat. So it's two kinds of campaigns. But I've tried to explain to people in the public, to people in the House, online, that it doesn't matter what party you belong to at the end of the day. It's how you affected their personal lives, how you affected their personal economy. And I feel like saying, look how I voted and check out the bills that I've sponsored and see the work that I've done. And I would challenge any candidate to do better than me. That's what I would say, not because of ego, but because how much I believe in protecting the freedoms of everybody in Ward 4 and Ward 5 in my city, and say, how has your life been affected by what's happened in the state, by being transparent about government, by giving them the tools to have their opinions and stuff be heard. I want to be that guy in this race and say, come to me. I always invite people to email, call me. I put everything that I do online in public for for everyone to see what's going on, because that's our job, is to make government transparent and accessible and small. And that's what our goals are. That's what I plan to tell them when I'm campaigning them.
Piggybacking off of that, Brandon and I are in a very interesting situation. Money does not win our elections in New Hampshire. It just doesn't.
Door knocking does.
Yep, it's 100% a foot race. How many doors can you knock on? How many people can you talk to? That is what will win.
6,000 for me.
Yeah, no, he can only spend in the primary and the general 6,000 and some change, something like that. So we're actually limited in how much money we can spend. In my particular district, in the primary election, I can spend 13,000 and change, and then in the general, I can spend another 13,000 and change. So money does not do it for us. It really is all about speaking to the voter, in doing exactly what Brandon is doing, being very transparent, and basically just doing the job well. As low of a bar as that is, just doing the job somewhat well and communicating that to people, face to face, is what will win our elections. In other elections, money plays a bigger role with regards to reaching voters. In the case of Senator Ebke, she's going to have to travel the state, so that will cost money. I
Not
don't.
the whole state, just 4 counties.
Well, yeah, but that's effectively traveling the state. Whereas I am running in the 2 towns I grew up in, and I have 10 other people that I represent those towns with. That's a lot of representatives. I literally just need to convince every single person in that district, or as many as I can, to give me one of their 11 votes. If I can get 5% of the aggregate vote in my district, I will win a seat.
I have to point out, New Hampshire is a very unique situation as far as having elected representatives, not like any other state. And Nebraska is pretty unusual too.
We're unusual, yes. Let me just piggyback on your question there about what kind of structurally the party.
Oh, I forgot.
Oh,
that
yes.
part.
And I think that's pretty key, because every campaign is somewhat different, you know, I mean, we all have different circumstances in our states and so forth. But I mean, I think that this is what I see as a lifelong other party person, is that the structure isn't there. I mean, you know, I remember, I don't know if either of these guys were there that day. Got two guys from Nebraska here, but right after I switched parties, I had a little meeting with a group of the Libertarians, right? And we did sort of a little training thing. And one of the comments I made was, okay, we need to figure out how to raise money. And we need to do, you know, I mean, I went down this list of things. We need to figure out how to raise money. We need to teach people to actually help campaign. They stopped when I said raise money. They just looked at me and they said, well, what would we do with the money? And I said, okay, what have I gotten myself into? But I mean, there's things like that. I mean, we need to figure out, you know, kind of system-wide how to help raise money. We need to figure out how the party can be helpful and needs to be more nimble, frankly. I mean, I don't know how it is every place else, but the party structure, both at the state and the national level, in my experience, is not particularly nimble. So I'm the sitting senator, and the governor throws out a press release that says that I'm bribing people by hosting showings of It's a Wonderful Life in the theaters in my community. I mean, that's what they did. The Republican Party sent out this press release that said that I was bribing people, and that people who showed up, that the 600 people in 4 small towns that showed up, were risking violating election law, right? It's like, no, they weren't. I mean, they have free lunches for the Republicans all the time. That said, the best thing that could have happened would be if the Libertarian Party the next day could, you know, scour the governor's accountability and disclosure forms and say, okay, well, what about the $10,000 you spent on tailgate parties for the Nebraska football games and things like, you know, so I mean, there's things like that, and the party doesn't seem to be particularly nimble. We are encouraging that in the state and nationwide. I think the structure of the party has always been sort of, you know, you dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and at some level we need to be able to be a little more reactive. I don't know what you've seen, but.
So I would agree with the two guys from New Hampshire that performance in office is going to be critical to re-election. Paul Salucci and I were swept into office with 50.01% of the vote in 1990. And as I said, we cut the budget a lot, we cut spending a lot, therefore we cut taxes a lot, 21 times, never raised them. And so the economy came back too. I do believe in the dynamic analysis of taxation. We got 71% on the reelect without really breaking a sweat, and that's in Massachusetts. And the Republican Party was 13% of the registered voters.
Quite the hat.
Oh, so
That's crazy. That's just crazy. I don't know how that happened.
it's not going to happen again.
Yeah, I forgot to mention too, like, so our party affiliates in New Hampshire are also trying to do a lot of outreach. And I just had my state affiliate convention as well. And we are going, you know, full stop as far as getting out in the community and being involved in community events, and that is huge. Being present, having eyeballs on all of the stuff that we have, you know, having booths at the town fairs, our parades. We do a gay pride parade in my town, and it's huge. It's super popular. We are going to be there. I'm going to be there to wave at people and saying, I'm here to support this. I believe in these rights. We have to be engaging in the public, and I think that our plans as far as being involved in the state and the communities, not just in state government, but in the actual people that we're there for, is going to help us. And I don't see any other candidate or state, the reps, like even in my city, that are doing as much as I'm doing, as being in the media, being public. I have a friend at the paper in my town who publishes every single thing I write to them. Every single thing I've ever sent to them has been in the paper. And that is huge for me, being an obscure third-party guy, like no one else is getting that kind of coverage. And again, it's not about me, it's about what I'm doing. And that's the most important thing. Actions always matter.
Can I follow up on that? It may not be at 100% on account of the actions we take in office. I think we may have a kind of perverse advantage here, you three as incumbent libertarians, okay? That's not the norm in this country right now. So we're all, as incumbent libertarians, kind of like two-headed cows. Everyone wants to come and see the two-headed cow at the county fair. I know the reason I got a lot of press my first term was because I made no bones about being a devotee of the Grateful Dead, and I was just thought this was great, and I was way out here on marijuana, way out here on gay and lesbian issues, and I was a Republican, so that made me a two-headed cow. And we may have that going in our favor.
I think you're right. Local media loves me. I get a lot of press, and they cover me. And it's funny because they didn't used to say, you know, Republican Laura Ebke, because we're officially nonpartisan, right? But now it's like, and Laura Ebke, the only libertarian in the legislature. So I mean, we get a lot of this extra press because we are the two-headed cow.
So we persuaded the Republicans not to run anybody against Dan Fishman for state auditor in
awesome.
Massachusetts. And he's got an incumbent with issues there. That's Dan in the back, wave Dan. So his opponent, the Democrat, has real issues. And I don't know what Dan's percentage is going to be, but it's not going to be 10% or 15 or 20 or 25%. It's going to be closer to 45 or 51.
51 is what our card.
51?
50.1 is enough.
Yeah. Well, I know that.
Yeah, exactly. I listen.
But so, you know, when a couple of things like that happen, people are going to think it's possible that, you know, that it'd be like Britain when the Liberals came back past Labour and made it a three-way fight instead of a two-way fight. And the press is not going to want to come late to that story. That may be another structural thing in our favor.
If I may piggyback off of both Senator Ebke and Mr. Phinney, in New Hampshire we have something interesting. You both talked about building affiliates and being public. For the first time ever, LPNH has county affiliates.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's huge. That's literally, it's never been a thing in the state of New Hampshire for the Libertarian Party. And I was, you know, very, very honored to be the inaugural secretary for my particular county's affiliate. And, you know, we, again, just like Brandon, we had our convention a couple weeks before theirs. But, you know, we were having meetups as a county affiliate. I met a fellow, Ryan Weiss, not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. He's lived in Manchester, New Hampshire his whole life. He's 19, he's younger than I am. And he's been an anarchist since he was in high school. So I feel for this guy so hard. And he never knew that there was a libertarian community in New Hampshire. Never knew. And yeah, right. He seriously never knew, even though we were right down the street. Basically, one of the hangout spots we have is right down the street from where he lived all of his life. And it was such an amazing experience to be the person to talk to him, to bring him to the LPNH. And it shows me that we are really reaching, you know, by building those county affiliates, we are really reaching the people who are just there. They're just, you know, there are libertarians in, you know, in our society. We just need to find them and bring them out, get them activated, and cultivate new ones. And all you have to do that is build your county affiliate, build, you know, any kind of organizational structure, hold a meetup, do whatever you can. Any way to reach out to people and just talk to them. Because if you can posit those ideas in a radical but reasonable way, you know, it will resonate.
I'm convinced that the majority of Americans are libertarian at heart. They just need to be given an opportunity to branch out and be brave enough to actually take it on political action. Yeah, to go libertarian. We have a lot of. How about Charles?
Okay, so I actually want to do more follow-up on this gentleman's question, because while I thought you guys gave some answers, I don't think they were really the answers he was looking for. And I mean, I look at it like 2 weeks ago, I had dinner with the former senator of South Dakota, Larry Kressler, He ran as an independent in 2014, got, I'd say, 15%. And then I think back to some people I supported. The first candidate I ever actually donated to was Adam Kokesh in 2010 when he ran as a Republican, little did I know. Gary Johnson in 2011. And thinking of the last 20 years, there's only been 3 real wins for third-party candidates. Jesse Ventura, cuckoo. Bernie Sanders, boo. And Angus King, I don't know what to say on that one. So it's more of just, what do you guys see as the advantage to people? Like if someone were to tell you right now that has a good resume, I want to run for Congress, I want to run for state senate, I want to run for governor, why would you pitch them run as a libertarian? And what advantages do you think would make them more electable? Because I think that was the question you had before. Yeah. So what would you pitch them?
Get it on the ground floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, something is certainly happening in the party. Even just in the 2 years, less than 2 years that I've been a part of it, and it's growing. There's, what we have to make sure of is that, again, we provide people with the resources that they need. So I think that, for instance, our races are going to be critical to show that not only can we win, but that there are resources out there to assist in the win. Because it's not easy to be a libertarian, right? Because there aren't that many people. We get 13,000 or 14,000 libertarians registered in Nebraska. And so we don't have the numbers that the Republicans have to draw on for, door knocking and phone calls and things like that. We do have some guys that are great at writing postcards here. We had a lot of postcards that are getting ready to go out. So I think that there are some disadvantages to being sort of small, but we can be small but mighty, I think. And that's, once we win a few, I think once we win re-election on a few, I think then the tide starts to shift. Because then it's a lot easier for other people to say, hey, switching parties isn't political suicide. If we can't prove that, then it makes it a lot tougher for those who might come over to do so.
Another thing, Charles, I would say, particularly the federal candidates, is that the other two parties are completely calcified. And I have noticed, and I've been around a lot of presidential campaigns in particular, everybody who's going to work on a presidential campaign is doing it to feather their own nest. They're doing it in hopes of advancement. And what the parties in Washington do for a living is just to scoop up money from funders so that all of their people can get reelected. That's really all they care about, with a few exceptions. That's all they care about. So they're not doing any real advancement. Whereas in this party, I do not get the feeling that people want to be libertarians and help the Libertarian Party because they want to know what the Libertarian Party can do for them. Quite the contrary. There's real altruism in this party. So maybe it's the last refuge of a scoundrel, but I would appeal to the better angels of their nature.
And saying the word altruism, that is why Ayn Rand did not support this party.
And I'm fine with that, Charles.
I think you're waiting for a while, so.
Yeah, I had a quick question. What's right now, as far as the Libertarian Party, what is the plan now and I guess in the future as far as, going to appeal outreach to other ethnic groups? Because the reason why is right now the two-party system, the Democrats and Republicans, they know how to appeal to like maybe Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans. And for me this year, I actually got my dad to vote for Gary Johnson for the first time because he kind of sees the the two-sidedness of the whole two-party system. And for me, example, it's just like that's like my great-grandfather actually came to the United States to build the Transcontinental Railroad. And so for me, when I looked at it was like a documentary about the whole Chinese Exclusion Act. And it's kind of funny is that the reason why that was passed because the federal government for some reason was able to appeal to these two parties and say, hey, this ethnic group is taking over this, they're if we put them in here, it's gonna be chaos. So it's just like, so for me, it's just like I don't know how is what is the Libertarian Party, what is I guess the plan outreach to try to,
I don't think any of us represent the Libertarian Party
Oh,
per se,
okay.
okay? I mean,
Okay.
we're not part of the Libertarian Party structure.
okay.
But here's what I would say. I think that what the Libertarian Party has to give, or to appeal to all manner of minority, you know, whether it's ethnic or sexual orientation or whatever, is that we treat people like individuals. We don't get engaged in a sort of class warfare or identity politics. Yeah, you know, I don't even really think about it. I don't think. You know, you don't ever know. But you know, I think that if you are whatever your background, you know, I come from a community that has a large Hispanic population. And I got into some trouble a few years, you know, the DACA votes, because I know that I'd signed a lot of school board diplomas when I was on the school board for kids who were DACA eligible. And, you know, my thinking is, you know, they succeeded. You know, why shouldn't they be given the opportunity just like everybody else? No matter where they're from. And so there's all sorts of things that go into this. I think that we got to be careful, though, as libertarians, as principled libertarians, to start playing too much of the identity politics game. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
I entirely agree with Senator Ebke. One of the things that I like to always reframe the minority outreach question is, what is the ultimate minority? And Senator Ebke answered that, it's the individual.
Yeah.
We are the party of individuals. We care about that minority. And it doesn't matter who you are, what your color is, what your creed is. We care about your ability to be yourself and be free as yourself. And yeah, that's how to sell that to a minority group. Because in a great many cases, minority groups are oppressed in really horrific ways. The camps in the 30s with the Japanese. We need to, that's just one example, but we need to demonstrate that we care about your minority, not because of who you are, but because you are an individual and you are just as valuable as any other individual on this planet.
We want to make sure that we're not going by the left's playbook as far as like, we want to make sure that we're talking about including these groups to get like a voting block. And as we're talking about being an individual, I mean, you can identify with whatever you want. But at the end of the day, you can only be responsible for you. And you can be an individual in the party to grow it as an individual. I don't want to see us turn into the left where we're trying to just bring in groups for the status quo, kind of thing. So we have to remember that our merits matter as individuals, not the labels and superficial qualities that we all have.
it's certainly demeaning of minorities of all types, whether it's women or Hispanic or Asian or African American. It's demeaning to them, I think, to think that that they're only capable of following the crowd. That they can't think independently. I'm sort of an anomaly in the Nebraska legislature. There's 12 women or 13 women in the legislature. And I have my kind of progressive women friends who come up to me, can you support this? No. But it's a women's issue. Yeah, I know. That's what you're calling it, but it really isn't, And so I think you have to be able to, we have to be able to empower people to think for themselves and not act as part of a kind of a herd mentality.
I always say the essence of a good democratic society is the idea that the individual shall not be thrust in a corner. And this current Republican administration works pretty much full-time on thrusting individuals in a corner, if you think about it.
So, who else has questions? You wait a while. You next.
Okay, the way I see it, the four of you up here are what the establishment parties fear the most. Elected officials switching over to the Libertarian Party, and there's been a lot of pushback, I know specifically for Senator Ebke, from the establishment GOP in Nebraska. So my question is, what's been the pushback that all of you have received from the parties that you left, and what's the best way to combat that?
So I'll start with that because since I was the last to switch in New Hampshire, there was kind of a precedent already kind of set by the other two that had switched. And I didn't go into this in my intro, too much in detail, but I had had frustrations the entire session here. Like after he switched, I was like, Caleb, I'm coming, dude, because I can't do this anymore. And he kept telling me, just wait, like don't do this yet. And I was just at the point where I was so tired of the crap that they were doing. I've seen him with my own eyes bullied by people in the party, and it angered me enough to want to just drop it right there and say I'm done. But again, he's kind of been my rock in a lot of ways because I get really passionate and emotional and temperamental, I guess. So he was able to kind of keep me at bay. But the things that I personally experience as far as like they've gone completely off of their own platform, implementing social programs at the expense of taxpayers, spending $600 million more in a budget when they tout themselves as the fiscal conservative party. And I was like, I didn't run and get elected on this platform. And it was at the point where I had a meeting with our governor, and I told him to his face, I cannot support your spending increases. I can't support the direction that our state is going in. I'm going to switch parties, and you're the first to know. And I have to give him credit. He was really graceful about it. He didn't get angry. He didn't scream at me. He didn't he was like, I understand. I'm sorry to see you go, but that's just how things are. And I want to not like him because he's like a nice guy, but politically, I don't do the moderate stuff. It's not for me, and I think that's kind of what the parties in New Hampshire are doing. A lot of it is blended together, and that's not what I got elected to do. And I've been saying that ever since. So the pushback part of it really it's been small from the public, and it's more from people in the House that they scoff at us for not being in their parties, and yet after session days they complain about bills that they lose. And I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't vote for this stuff in the first place. This is completely, contradictory of what your goals are. So I am confident in the reasons that I've switched, and you can be mad all you want, but you're the one who's losing. So.
So as I said earlier, I had resistance from the GOP in New Hampshire from day one. It was very clear that, like Brandon actually pointed out, there was a time when the Speaker of the House took me in the back room, took me aside and said, basically, you're not going to vote for your hometown boy? And, it was disgusting. Politics is a dirty, dirty game. It really is, especially when you have really, really dirty people up at the top of it.
Tell what happened to him.
What happened?
To
Oh yeah. So Speaker Jasper ended up getting. He's not very popular whatsoever. He ended up resigning to take a position as Commissioner of Agriculture, which of course was given to him by the governor to literally get him out of the Speaker's office.
It was brilliant. It was so beautiful.
It was an interesting move. I got to hand it to him. But yeah, no, it's I had resistance from day one. The majority leader, deputy majority leader, literally told me to my face that he would ensure that my bills died. I only had 5 bills in the first year, and you bet your ass I had well more than 5 bills in the second year. And I got one of those bills passed. The key to overcoming that adversity in being confronted by your former party. And it's interesting because I've actually seen it on both sides, because we have Joseph Stalcup who switched being a Democrat. And Joseph, while he was a Democrat, voted to repeal concealed carry licensing in the state of New Hampshire. He was one of 10 Democrats to vote to do that. And he was taken into the minority office, and he was basically told, you won't vote that way again, or you're not welcome here. You will be shunned in the caucus. And they've done that. I've spoken with a number of Democrats in the House who are effectively shunned from their caucus because of votes on certain things. And it's the same way in the Republican Party to a lesser extent. Of course, there are more dissenters in the Republican Party, and it's more of a patchwork coalition right now. And that's why, again, as Dave said earlier and Bill said, it is primed, specifically the Republican Party is primed to just split. But the Democrats are going through their own things right now as well. And of course, that means for all of us going forward, it means that resistance that I faced, as bad as it was, it's only going to get worse. Because as these parties go into death throes, they're going to do everything that they can to hold on to that last bit of power that they have, regardless of whether or not they're in the majority or in the minority. So, yeah.
I think what we're all kind of getting at here, though, I mean, and Nathan knows this a little bit, being from Nebraska, but I mean, you have different reactions. The pushback is different. The pushback from kind of the party establishment, if you will, for me, has been fairly significant. The Republican Party is just pissed. Frankly, because I left, even though they told me, even though the governor told me that I really wasn't welcome anymore. So I left. Why are you mad? And on the other side of things, I sent out an email right after I switched parties to all the people on my mailing list. I sent out letters to all of the people who had supported me in the district. And I told them, this is why, I'm changing, this is why I'm changing, hope I can still earn your vote, yada, yada. And it's amazing, I sent out about 1,000 emails one day, right after the switch, before the press could go to press and get to the, within about 24 hours, I've received 100 responses, so a 10% response in emails from those people. And except for 2, who were not very kind. The rest of them said, that's okay, we always knew that's what you were anyway. Thanks for standing up to the, it was cool. So, we'll see how much pushback I get in the election. But as a general rule, I think most people, if you're not part of the actual establishment, don't care that much.
So I'm beneath contempt in official Washington. The R's think I'm a D and the D's think I'm an R. So I spend my time in the business and legal world.
Yeah.
I know in Texas, the one thing that Texas Republicans hate more than Democrats are their own party leadership. So maybe you can convince them that Libertarians are not Republican leadership. Just have to get that message across really effectively. Anyway, who else have questions? Go with you.
I got 2 things. I really enjoyed your speech earlier, but there's something I'd like you to include. Felons can run for office. They can run for U.S. Congress, and U.S. Senate, and U.S. President. Most people don't know that. And I think we should promote that idea because this is a very underrepresented demographic. And I think there's like 30 million of them in this country, or some crazy number like that, more than you'd think. And then the other thing is this. We have 75 or so affiliated counties in this state out of 254. That sounds like we're doing something. But when you zoom in and you look at the affiliated precincts, we look like specks on a petri dish. And the reason for this is this. After this weekend, all of these people that were elected precinct chairs are going to be thrown away like prostitutes. They will have no monthly meetings. They will have no bank account for their precinct party. Meanwhile, our Republican or Democrat competitors, their precinct parties are much more established. And it's about getting into the weeds of the community. People talk about grassroots, there's only 800 people that live in my precinct. That's pretty simple to talk about block walking. Block by block. These precinct chairs and these precinct treasurers and so forth, that needs to mean something. And they need to be implemented and they need to be fixtures year-round throughout the process. That way we can get dug in and embedded. And that's how you guys are going to get reelected. And winning on those city councils and those local, I really loved your speech.
Thank you.
But
Let me just say a couple things. the Republicans may be organized, the Republicans and the Democrats may be organized better down here than they are in Nebraska, except for probably 3, maybe 5 counties in Nebraska. We've got 93. They really aren't that organized. I live in a county of about 12,000. And we had, I still have friends in the Republican Party. I was there. They had their county convention last week. They had 3 people. No, they had 3 people. The chair, the vice chair, and the secretary showed up. One of my opponents showed up, so they had 4 for a little while until he left. And after he left, they were all talking about how many of my signs they wanted to distribute. So I mean, the parties are not particularly strong in a lot of places. They may be stronger, in your state than they are in my state, but I think we've got some real openings. So I think we got potential, and we need to figure out how to organize the party. But I think we're coming along. Yeah.
Oh, if I may, to respond to your portion about felons running for office, I think it's actually a good idea. I know it's hard to sell a felon running for office. However, if you pick the right felon, for real, I mean this, someone who is a felon for no other reason than having committed a victimless crime, that is a perfect person to run for office, especially as a libertarian, because it puts the other candidates in a very, very interesting position of having to argue essentially why that person should be in jail or should have been incarcerated in the first place, especially if it's on the issue of cannabis. And actually, in the state of New Hampshire, we do have a convicted felon running for Congress in the 1st District. I have done some work for him in helping him get his social media set up and actually getting a treasurer and putting it all together. And he's actually a very, very smart man. He's a felon for one reason and one reason only. His wife had cervical cancer, and he, to treat her symptoms in Michigan, where he lived previously, to moving to New Hampshire, he would illegally purchase cannabis, distill it, and make Rick Simpson oil. And he was eventually, caught and caged for what he did. And it's very unfortunate that this man, for the rest of his life, is going to be a felon, and will have rights restricted. He's not able to own a firearm. But he has a very, very good message, I think, to sell. And I don't think that felons should be immediately discounted just because of that. I think that if someone's a violent felon, or if someone clearly has previously in their life violated the non-aggression principle, I think that should be a disqualifier for most libertarians to even vote for that person.
So it should be forever branded?
I don't know. I mean, my model Criminal Justice Reform Act, in most cases, probably no felons cannot vote. So I say, yeah, let them vote after they paid their debt to society. They get out of the joint, fine.
Yeah.
Don't let them join from the joint. Vote from the joint.
State by state.
State by state,
At
yeah.
least in Texas, if you're off paper, you can register and vote again.
Yeah, I would go so far as to let them vote even in jail, because I think it is so critically important that the people who have been absolutely screwed by the legal system in a great many cases ought to be afforded the franchise.
Some cities do it.
That is probably right. Step on the path.
Yeah.
Like, so any little, stepping stone towards self-respect is going to make that guy have an easier re-entry.
Yes.
I'm going to go back to the first part of your question, if I may. So I think part of the reason why we're invited here is because we're talking about building affiliates, right? And I've seen what Texas is doing, and this is a ginormous state. Anyway, at least a lot bigger than us. I think that right now we're trying to figure out how the national party is going to organize, and then it's going to be a top-down thing. Well, we can't do it that way. We're not that kind of party. So I'm super in favor of letting the states kind of figure out themselves. They get the membership and send them to the LNC afterwards, and go to national conventions and then try to figure out how to bolster it from the bottom up. And we're doing that in New Hampshire. I think that we're really strong in New Hampshire. We've only really been strong since 2016. It's really crazy how fast it's happened. Now we have 3 state representatives who are now in this party. the states have to kind of figure out how they're going to fundraise, how they're going to find people to volunteer to, to be on the ground, getting to people's doors and doing it that way instead of waiting for national, or and being an affiliate even, trying to wait for the state to do that. You kind of have to take the onus on yourself to build your coalition, invite people in, and then build from the bottom up.
Here's what I would say, Republicans didn't used to be a top-down organization either. Republicans used to be bottom-up, and they referred to the different federated organizations. It was a federated system. And so, and I think that this top-down mentality has created the beginning of the end for the Republicans and probably for the Democrats. That's where we have to, start building from the bottom up.
Right, who else? Okay, well, let's get Aaron first.
Okay, Governor Weld, you mentioned you see some trends right now that might make it possible for a libertarian presidential way. What are those trends that you're seeing?
Well, the other two parties splitting, the other two parties being calcified and unattractive, the national population getting the idea that they're not working for we the people anymore, that all they care about is campaign finance and getting into bed with the, talk about cronyism. I mean, and they won't have a crony unless that crony is well heeled and can help them bankroll their campaigns to perpetuate the monopoly. And people are getting a good whiff of that, I think. I thought the conditions were propitious for a libertarian run last time because of the ideology, socially welcoming and fiscally conservative. But now we've got not just a doctrinal wind at our back, we've got a lot of structural wind at our back too.
Cal.
So, I'm just curious what you as a panel think about how you've been welcomed by the party. Governor Weld, I know you've had some people be less than welcoming too. I don't know, Senator Ebke, if you've had that, especially from some of the, I guess you would say, hardliners. And then the other part of that is, do you think that there are elements of the party who are basically giving your opponents, and maybe this is to Senator Ebke, ammunition which they would then be able to use against you by their either statements or actions?
I know what you're asking. Look, couple of things. First of all, I felt, on the whole, very welcome by party volunteers, party folks that I've been to, I think, 5 different conventions now, and always been very much welcome. There are individuals out there. I mean, I had to walk away from a conversation with somebody in Michigan a couple of weeks ago that started down this sort of, well, if you believe that, you aren't really. And okay, fine. And I just walked away. Every once in a while I'll see hits on Facebook and okay, whatever. But for the most part, I feel very welcome. Now, in terms of, I do think that to the extent that we're on social media, okay, and libertarians, whether official or otherwise, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that the old parties are watching. Okay, that they are very likely watching the things that are being said. I tell the Libertarian Party in Nebraska that it's entirely likely that there are some Republicans who are on that page watching everything that is said, and that anything that is extreme is going to be tied with me. Okay? Even if it's not me, even if it doesn't represent, and so, especially if it's done in the name of the party. Individuals, I don't care, people can say whatever they want to, but if it's done in the name of the party, I think we need to be careful. I don't know in the end, you don't know how much of a fishbowl we're living in when you start talking about social media. Maybe we're the only ones really paying attention to it, and the rest of the world isn't paying much attention, but, I think we should be careful at least about what we put out there in terms of official statements.
Apropos the Republican Party watching, so 4 days ago, John Boehner and I go on the board of this cannabis company. 2 days ago, Donald Trump says, we want to have comments filed with the FDA by April 23rd on descheduling cannabis as a class 1 narcotic, which was the number one thing Boehner and I spent 48 hours saying on television in New York. One day ago, yesterday, he makes his deal with Cory Gardner in Colorado. Oh yeah, no, we're gonna take care of the states that have legal adult rec. We're gonna make that fine. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was a coincidence, but the guys at Acreage, the company whose board we joined, said no. They've heard through the grapevine that there was cause and effect.
Sometimes it's good, not bad.
That's a good effect.
Yeah, some of you may have seen a couple of weeks ago, occupational licensing reform was covered both in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed, and in Nebraska, and in Reason. That was a rather deliberate effort on our part, knowing that the governor probably reads the Wall Street Journal. Being part of the, we decided that we're just going to be preemptive about that and not give him an opportunity to, it's just being live streamed. But you know, what we really wanted to do was to make sure that that he understood that if they saw that it really was a thing, and that we weren't going to allow it to just die, you know, without an opportunity. And there's still this chance out there. I think it's a slim chance that he could pocket veto it. Which day 60 is on Wednesday. We're up for final reading on day 60, which we never do. So there's an outside chance that after we adjourn, he could pocket it, but I don't think he will.
I was speaking to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago, and what came up was the problem the Libertarian Party has is a short institutional memory. When somebody decides I'm a libertarian, I'm going to run for office, it's almost like there's not a lot of resources or education or support for that. They sort of have to blaze their own trail and figure out things as they go. The entire campaign staff is sort of people that are volunteering and figuring out and learning as they go. I don't know if that's been your experience, obviously, first time being elected. That's why I think it's great that we have all this experience at this table, talking to people and sharing that, and hoping to extend that memory. But in terms of, you know, how important these re-elections are in terms of building out the grassroots activism and the infrastructure of the party in your localities, and then encouraging other people to follow in your footsteps, other people to run for offices, and that the races at the state senate, state rep level are important, and the municipal level are also important. So how do we encourage more people to run for office and give them that support?
I just want to say on this one. You know that a lot of the campaign training organizations that are out there that Republicans use are run by libertarians.
Yeah.
And they're training Republicans with libertarian principles to a large extent. And the Republican Party really doesn't, the Republican Party really doesn't have that infrastructure that you think they have to get those candidates trained. It's all done by hirelings, most of them are libertarian. The problem is the libertarians the trainers go where the money is. And the money is in the Libertarian Party. They love to be training libertarians, but nobody's going to pay them to do it right now. And that's where the problem is.
So I've been saying that to be a viable candidate, you have to be, you know, a likable guy or gal. And I think that putting aside the partisan polity or party issues, that if you can get people to rally to your cause as you are the candidate for that specific, seat, for it's local or state or whatever, then you have a successful campaign because people believe in you as a person, not your party. And even though we're in the party and we are proud to represent in our states, I don't want that to be the focus of our campaign. Not only because it's such an uphill battle for us, but because I want to win on my merits and I want to be a good candidate. I want people to see that I've done good work and that I'm viable to continue to do that in the future. As far as the party getting involved, it's again building up from the bottom, having the state affiliates be successful enough to have people come in, spend money there, get the volunteers in. I have a team that's like from all over the state and out of state because they believe in me as a person. And that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to garner to me, is that if you believe in me, help me out. That's really all I've been trying to say.
Yeah, I think that we may all have different views of this come November 8th or 9th. You know, I mean, bring us back and see what we have to say about some of these things, because I think that's, you know, we're thinking in one direction now, but things could change very drastically. If all three of us are still are reelected,
It'd be shocking, but
That would be amazing.
It's going to happen, guys.
I would love that.
It's going to happen.
it's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
Important moment in libertarian history.
It would be,
Yeah, but I mean, if and when it happens, it will totally change the way things are done. And we will all have had experiences that we can use to feed into the kind of the knowledge base and in terms of training future campaign organizations.
Well, in my district, I just want to continue on this. In my particular district, I had help from only one person, and that was another candidate in the district. For real, we only went out door knocking together twice, and we went out individually, you know, by ourselves. And he went out with his wife and his kid, because of course kids sell at the door. You know, you gotta bring the baby if you got one. But we did door knock a couple times together. He's an anarchist. He's still a Republican in office. I won't name him, but he's in my district.
So there's a small universe there, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty small universe. But you know, he was the only person who helped me, and I was the only person other than his wife who helped him. The Republican Party, the only thing that they did in our district for our election, during the general election, they spent like $100 and some odd on an ad in the local paper. I don't know how many votes that really got, but that was all they did. That was the only institutional backing we had in that particular race. So I think our chances in New Hampshire, if we can even organize a little bit and get like 2 people to come out and knock doors with us, I'm pretty sure we can swing it.
But
So,
Gil, how many voters are there in the district?
in my district, there are roughly 33,000 voters.
Like 250,000 in Texas, in a district for
Yeah.
state legislature.
Yeah,
So
it's a massive difference, I understand. But, you know, I'm just speaking of my experience in New Hampshire. I know that other states it's going to be a wildly different game. But, you know, institutional backing in New Hampshire is a weird thing. It really only exists in very key races, or races that the Republican Party in the state determines are key, namely their Senate races, sometimes their House races, if you're a committee chair or someone important.
maybe the LP needs to figure out how to export New Hampshire to the rest of the country.
That would be amazing.
Well, I've been saying that if, you know, if we win in New Hampshire, that's the ultimate validity to this party. We will see people come here in droves, I believe, because we've been able to get somebody in a state office and say, wow, they can get people elected. Now I can feel free to go to this party and be where I've always wanted to be and where I've always should have been.
And it makes the sales pitch so much easier.
We've got a couple of questions. The fellow back. That's you.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Almost that.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the panel for being here and answering a lot of our questions. My question has to do with the recent election of Donald Trump, and as well as kind of everything that's gone along with that along the way. Some of the things that I saw in the election that brought a lot of people to vote for Trump, even though he wasn't really a Republican, still isn't, and the party sort of shifted, and as Bill said, you know, there's sort of a split between the party, and that's happening in both the Democratic side and the Republican side. What can the Libertarian Party do, and as well as you as candidates, to follow that need in American society, or at least perceived need, that we need less corruption, more authentic leadership, a more need for better policies, let's say, less political pandering just to get elected again and again, etc. What can the party and you as leaders do to make that happen in the next, say, year, 5 years, 10 years?
So can I start with that? Sorry if I'm talking too much, but so I've tried to make my first term be about starting small. And I've made a concerted effort to look at some of our ridiculous RSAs and say, how is this enforceable? How can we, get rid of it? And almost all of my bills have been about getting rid of dumb laws. And I think that one of the ways that we can be effective is this. It's always the big fish that that gets the most press. But I've actually gotten a lot of press for the small stuff that I've done. So I'll put myself out there because it's still funny to me how it all kind of played out. But I put in a bill to repeal the prohibition on inhaling toxic toxic inhalants for effect. And when I introduced that bill to the committee, it was always like, why do you want to do that? So, essentially the anti-huffing law, right? And I tried to make the argument that if someone is buying a household chemical legally, how are they then a criminal? So my whole goal was to introduce the philosophy of the non-crime. Essentially like we're making criminals out of people that aren't doing anything wrong to others, maybe to themselves, but we can't make them criminals for it. Just having that conversation in the media was enormous for me because I was able to present that platform. That is a part of our platform is to getting, to get rid of those kind of laws. I tackled a law from the 1850s that if you're a juggler on the sidewalk, you have to get a permit or you're a felon. It's stuff like that we think is funny, but I go to the House floor and I say, if we keep this bill this law on the books, we are creating criminals out of people. And I'm trying to get rid of criminal penalties. And I've had some success. I have 2 bills that have passed 2 Senate committees now, and there will be a Senate vote next Thursday, and I do expect both bills to pass. And one of the bills was about a not very known law in New Hampshire that if you're performing on a stage, if you have a glass of beer, it's illegal. You can't have any alcohol on stage while performing. And if you get caught, the venue gets a fine from $500 to $1,000, and they can have the ability to sell alcohol taken away from them. So it's looking at a dumb issue, but then seeing what the penalty is for it. And that bill has been unanimous throughout the entire process of yes, we will pass this to get rid of it. And that's huge, for the industry of entertainment in New Hampshire, because now people aren't going to be afraid to have a drink on stage, have a sip, and then keep playing their song. They're not going to get fined for it. The venues won't get shut down, and more bands will come to New Hampshire. Those are the kind of issues that aren't really big things, but to us it's huge because now state reps in the Libertarian Party are getting bills passed, and that's the ultimate goal here.
I'd love to answer your question as well. A lot of the things that I've done while I've been a legislator have not been flashy or out in the open. In fact, I would say most of the most effective work that I've done has been behind the scenes in suggesting amendments to members of committees. Something that simple. If you see a bill that's pretty good but could use some work, or is bad but with an amendment might be better, or different ways to improve existing legislation that's not even your own, just find it in committee, talk to someone who's your friend on the committee, see if you can get an amendment proposed in committee so that they know that it has support from the general body, and try to affect policy that way. That's I did that several times with a bill in criminal justice and public safety. That was Dan Hines' bill. What the hell was it? No, well, I was co-sponsor on that, the first session, but there were a couple of bills in criminal justice, public safety, one in judiciary, that I kind of piggybacked on and asked members of the committee to try to amend the bill to save it. And in one case it was successful, in the other it failed. But that is some of the best work that you can do, just talking with the other legislators and trying to convince them that what you support in policy is also what they should support. Even if it's not your bill. I only had one bill that passed, House Bill 1672. which is pertinent to the Therapeutic Cannabis Users Registry. It prevents information from being transmitted to federal authorities without a warrant. So simple. Such a simple bill. It passed the House with over 300 votes in the affirmative.
It was pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's going to fly through the Senate, and it's also the first bill to ever pass the New Hampshire House of Representatives in the last 100 years since we've had a third party in the New Hampshire House to have co-sponsors from all three parties. And that is something that, you know, I really wanted to make sure happened, and I got it done. You know, getting the votes in the Senate right now is a little bit interesting. I still got to get one person on judiciary, but you know, it's expected to pass. I think I'll be able to get it through the Senate. If not through the committee, I'll be able to overturn it on the floor of the Senate. So,
Do you think?
Something you said just reminded me. You know, the fact that you've got Libertarians, Republicans, and Democrats all on a bill, and I've had the same thing. We need to change the way we refer to things.
Yeah.
You know, I always, when the press comes up to me and asks me about something that I've signed on to, and that there's a Republican and Democrat, you know, I said, yeah, it's a real tripartisan effort. You know, we need to break the paradigm.
Yes.
And that's a way that you can do it. I mean, it's a pretty little thing, but it gives us some credibility.
Indeed.
And I don't remember what the question was, so I'm
How do we, what do we use as issues 2020? And in addition to the substantive issues, you know, I've actually said this publicly a couple of times. I'm starting to feel sorry for Donald Trump, and I was implacably opposed to everything he did early on, particularly the immigration and trade stuff in the wall and all that. I was just horrified, and everyone I know is horrified. And I was pretty tough on him at the end of the 2016 campaign, saying he lacked this. Well, I started out comparing him to Adolf Hitler. Nothing has seen fit to make me change my opinion on that. Then towards the end, I gave a speech saying that he lacks the stability to be president of the United States, and people who act the way he does would not be, if they were a 10-year-old child, they would not be suffered to remain at the dinner table until the end of dinner. And that was true when I said it. But again, nothing has made me see fit to change the opinion about him. I think his bedrock problem is he doesn't have the stability to be president of the United States. But you know, he has started to be right about twice a day, which is the same ratio as a broken clock has for telling the time.
Millennials don't understand that.
Shut up, Dan.
I'm wearing an actual watch.
Yeah.
But you know, I think one can subtly point out by saying I feel sorry for Mr. Trump. He seems to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's just not in the right spot. That's a slightly more tactful way of saying this guy is so far over his head that his feet are touching the ocean floor. And you know, analyses like that are going to help him. On the other hand, all the Rust Belt Democrats, the Reagan Democrats who came over and voted for Donald Trump in 2016, they are never going back to the Democratic Party. There's entirely too much Brie and Chardonnay in the Democratic Party for those guys.
Yeah.
But we're pretty much out of time. Let's guys make sure you were waiting for a next question. Do you have anything?
Yeah. So for the people who come after you, what are you doing to increase the skills of your local party, like training, like volunteer coordinators and things like that? Like, how are you handling that to make the next runs easier?
If I may, as the inaugural secretary for my county affiliate, that was one of the things that we really wanted to focus on, was actually building that kind of apparatus to train people, to actually like know how to run a campaign, be a treasurer on a campaign, things like that. And we just started having outreach meetups. We literally just started meeting up at a restaurant and having someone who has done it, whether or not it's a candidate like myself or someone who you know, just wanted to come and talk about it. I think we had Chip Spangler, who is actually now the chair of SNHLP, which is the county affiliate for Merrimack and Hillsborough. We had him, he was a previous chair of LP Maryland, right after Nick Sarwark was chair in LP Maryland. And he moved up to New Hampshire for the Free State Project, and he's run a number of campaigns, or he's helped run a number of campaigns, been, a fiscal agent or what have you. And it's just very valuable to just have a little forum where, you advertise it a little bit to people, say, hey, come out, we'll teach you how to run a campaign account. We'll teach you how to file disclosure forms. Things that simple. Really, you just have a meetup and do it. That's how it's done. You just gotta get out and...
We're kind of doing that as well. I think we might have started that because LPTexas was our first LP, like affiliate in the state. And we've also, kind of changed hands in leadership for that as well. And the chair of LPTexas was the state rep candidate in Boulder. So we have experience of people that had a ground game. I'm not gonna lie, I'm in my first term and I have a lot to learn about campaigning. I'm not an expert, but I've learned how to talk to people. I've learned how people respond to issues, what issues are important to them. We've gotten to know the dynamics in our state as far as what issues are super important. Election law, the drug war. We have a huge college student base in our state, so the voting rights for them is a big issue. It's, stuff like that is how we can communicate what our plans to address that is. And then our ground game is, how do we figure out what doors to knock on? Well, now that we're kind of outside that two-party duopoly, we can go to everybody now and say, I can appeal to you and I can appeal to you, but this isn't about the party, it's about being the individual, being the candidate for the office. And going forward, again, I'm not an expert in campaigning, but I just want people to see the positive things that I've done and what I'm going to continue to do that going forward. And I think for any candidate for an office, you have to say not just what you believe, but what you're going to do or not do.
So in answer to your question, I would just do fundraising and organizing of fundraising undergirds a lot of this stuff. We are about 9 minutes past time.
We were,
Yes.
time flies.
I want to thank everyone panel. It was great. Thanks for coming.